Welcome to our very first Teaching Out Loud, a series where we explore educator insights for the modern classroom. Each 30-minute session builds on a Soundbites newsletter you can find on our website. Maria and I have known each other for over a decade. We've been collaborators, coworkers across multiple organizations, and friends. We share a deep love of teaching and learning, and we often joke that when we get together, it's a bunch of nerding out about new research, classroom ideas, or technology that's caught our attention. Teaching Out Loud is the next evolution of these conversations to broaden the space and the perspective because education has been changing so much. And we want to share those insights that are coming directly from lived classroom experience, which is what Maria is going to bring to us today. Maria has been an educator for more than 30 years across K-12 and higher ed. She's currently a middle school teacher in Utah, and she also is our CEO and co-founder of Socrate. I've spent the last 24 years in education technology wearing lots of hats, from a teacher to an instructional designer, online learning researcher, storyteller, and now with Director of Customer Success at Socrate. Today, we're going to be discussing the Soundbites article, Have Devices Failed Education? You won't be quizzed on it, so you don't have to read it ahead of time, no worries. But you can always jump to our website, the link's in our description, and go read it whenever you want. There's more links and documents and all the research in there. You can also sign up while you're there to get our weekly Soundbite newsletter into your inbox. Every week we have a new topic that we're discussing, and we're going to be doing a whole full series of these teaching out loud that you can sign up and see those topics on our website as well. Our hope with this is that you leave with a few actionable ideas, some deeper questions of your own, and a sense of community, knowing there are others who deeply care about the art of teaching and how it's changing. So we're going to dive in. One of the things that I really liked in the Soundbites article, you made this point about how you didn't see this research as surprising. You didn't even need to see this research as surprising because there was an article that came out about how basically EdTech is failing students. The link's in the article, so you can go find that. That it was obvious to you as a teacher that this promise of devices making learning easier had failed. What have you been seeing in your classroom? What's changed in the 30 years you've been teaching?
Well, it's interesting. When I first started teaching, we had very little access to computers or, any kind of technology. And that, of course, changed over time from students first having access to computers like in a lab to then having their own devices at home for college students. And then we saw the proliferation of like one-to-one devices in K-12 classrooms, especially because of COVID, being the only way for students to learn while they were at home was to give them a device. And so now we've seen, a real, it's almost like a given that a student is going to have a one-to-one device, starting at least in middle school and secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that, this has got to be a good thing for them because the world is full of computers. So the interesting thing is that the world is full of computers, but the device that people most commonly interact with now would be a smartphone. And in fact, most people, don't interact with the computer at home at all. They're interacting with a smartphone or maybe a tablet if they have a tablet that they'd rather use, right? Um, and so the computer, which is a thing they would interact with at work, is not actually the most common interface device in the household. And what the kids are doing with their computers is treating them like they are a phone or a tablet, in that they see them as a device to interact with social media, play games, talk to their friends, chat, have FaceTime meetings, things like that. They don't actually see that computer device we give them as a learning tool at all. It's a way to interact with all the fun things in the world
Right.
where they get
Totally.
punished at school by having to learn on it instead. And their patterns of behavior, what they do with it in their free time, are so strong that we spend all of our time at school kind of like policing their use of these devices because these devices are not seen as learning tools to students. They are seen as playthings to students.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the frustration from teachers comes in, is that there was this, promise that, these were going to be the devices that students would be learning on. But because they take them home and do all sorts of things in their free time that are not learning,
Mhm.
that is not what the devices are primarily used for. And so we find ourselves instead doing tech support for devices that aren't charged, aren't updated, don't work, won't log into things, can't access. Like when we're at school and on the school networks with the blockers for websites and various things, these devices are barely functional. And so, like the promise that, like, oh, kids can use these devices for research and kids can use these devices for, accessing the world. They actually can't. They can't access YouTube. They can't access, well, I mean, they can. They learn all sorts of ways to VPN around these things, but never when they're at school, right?
Right.
And so, we not only don't have access to the world through the devices, but they have trouble just accessing the programs we need for classes. They don't remember their logins. You give them QR codes to access things through, a QR code so that they don't have to remember a login, and then they lose the QR code, and then you're printing QR codes, right? We're just we're like tech support for a room full of devices we didn't ask to be tech support for. And many of us find that, going back to paper is easier than any activity you try to do on a device, because the devices are so poorly functioning and as learning tools. And that's not what we signed up for, right? We didn't sign up to be tech support for, if you teach 6 classes, that's, 24 students times six, 150 devices a day. I didn't sign up to be tech support for 150 devices a day and all
I
of
was
the excuses for why things don't work.
I was reminiscing on my one of my first ed tech jobs at an educational game company where like you sold to a school that had a computer lab, and that's what you sold to. Like it wasn't an expectation that students would have access to devices all the time. It was like, no, they go to a lab where that's like the dedicated area to do online, online learning or using devices, and that has shifted so much now.
Yeah. I think, it's funny. Maybe the only people who aren't frustrated with the device use is like the computer instructors. And that's because they typically have a lab they use for these things. Maybe not typically, but like at our school, our computer instructors have a lab. And when the students go to that lab, they're using the school's computers that have been set up, by the school and are not drained of battery and are not, dysfunctional because they have 200 gigabytes of video downloaded to them, and so like they're teaching kids on the devices that are closest to what they would have in the workforce, while the rest of us are stuck using these like deprecated devices that
Oh.
aren't charged and barely function. And it's ironic that, we teach students on how to use computers on one device and then hand them a different device for the use in all of their other classes.
So this gives me a good segue to the next question, which is kind of, this has become a burden on teachers, right? So are teachers frustrated by the technology itself, or are they frustrated with what technology has done to their teaching, how it has changed their ability to teach and focus?
I think we are, I think we're frustrated with both, honestly. The devices are just so much of it is a distraction. Like if the devices always worked, that'd be one thing, but they really just don't. And there's not a second human in the classroom to handle the tech support for the devices. And so we're losing a lot of learning time to tech support for devices as we walk around and we help this child find where they're supposed to be and figure out a solution for this child who doesn't have a charged device today. And, like that's just taking away time from learning. And it's not time we can afford to lose. Um, I think there's also frustration with the fact that, like, schools are so poor now with regards to the materials we can access. we actually, you may remember in your childhood having textbooks you took home from school and having books you took home to read. That is not the reality today anymore. Um, there was a promise that like all of the materials would be accessible on these devices, and certainly
Right.
some of that is the case, but the kids won't access them at home. And
Mm-hmm.
so if the kids won't do the work at home, then there's no point in having the work on the devices, right? And the problem is that the kids tab switch away from the work you give them, right? And so, you say, all right, I want you working on this right now, and you give them access to their course materials. But the second you walk away from them, they tab switch to playing a game or, chatting in a Google Slides
Right.
presentation with their friends because that's the only way they figured out how to chat with their friends, right? And so they just turn the devices back into a plaything as soon
Mm-hmm.
as your back is turned, right? And so that then makes us into cops where we're like policing the devices, right? And we didn't sign up to do that either. That wasn't the goal. And the truth is if you give them a paper assignment, they have to stay focused on the assignment. And that's where we like fall back to because it's like you could spend all your time policing devices and trying to keep kids on task, or you could just give it to them on paper where they don't have any other choice. They can daydream or they can do the work, right? Those are the two options they've got. And that's a better set of options than the policing of devices.
Right.
It's sad to me that we don't like I just bought a classroom set of books for my students out of my own pocket. And
As
I have
most teachers have to.
Yeah, and the truth is that I can't afford to buy two classroom sets so that each class can have a book to take home. I need to buy one classroom set and they'll only have access to them in the classroom. And like that's not the point of reading a book. The point of reading a book is to become immersed and to bring it home and to read it on your own time. And the truth is we just can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a shame, right? And we have the same thing with textbooks now. If you have a textbook, it stays in the classroom now, and you only read it when you're in the classroom. You don't take it home. You don't,
Hmm.
it's, I don't know. The world is very different now. And I mean, there are some things that I think the devices are good for,
Mhm.
uh, but I'm not sure overall if it's been a good choice to send devices home with kids.
Right.
Like the things that we can do on devices it would be better if they only had access to the devices at school, because then they would really be forced to focus and use them when they are
Right.
given the time to, right? And then to have some kind of policy where you can check one out if you're absent or something like that. I think that might be a better balance to this problem so that if you're going to get addicted to playing games and using, social media, you do that on your own time at home, on your own device, not the one that you're meant to be learning on.
Yeah. Well, I know that there was a data point in the article, the original research, about 38 minutes of every hour that students are on a device is spent not on the work, right? So
Yeah.
you having to, as a teacher, take on this role of policing and managing and all of this, it's like that promise of saving time for teachers and getting more efficiency and getting students more personalized learning. Like these were all the promises of devices that have not come to fruition. But maybe there's something that it actually took away from teachers, not only adding jobs, but it's taking things away. Have we quietly taken away things from teachers by adding all these new devices and platforms that they've had to manage now?
Yeah, I mean, I think because we spend the time, I'll use the example of like online math homework for because I have a lot of experience with that. I don't think that ed tech ever intended for online math homework to take over as the way students learn math. Um, so, a lot of schools were given access, the state, like this is what typically happens. The state does a contract with a company.
Hmm.
and then gives that program to everybody in the state for free to use, right? And so then you're like, well, we better use this program because it's the one we get for free, right? It's not necessarily the best program. It's not necessarily the right program for an age group, but it's the program you're given for free, so you're going to use it, right? And and so, now students probably spend a good portion of class time accessing, one of these programs where they practice their math. But it's really turned into, a case where the kids like answer a question. If they get it wrong, they just try again. They try a different number. They might go watch a video that shows them exactly how to do the problem, and they just move the number for their problem into the video, like, okay, so it's going to be 10, right? They don't know how to do the problem. They just
Right.
know that if they follow the pattern of the video, they can type in a correct answer, right?
Just click next. Just click
Click
next. You'll
Yeah,
get
click
through it.
next until you get through it, right? And so students are going through this perfunctory exercise of doing problems, but are they learning anything doing those
Right.
problems? And that's replaced class time. And so like the class time you used to spend with students, like interacting with them and seeing their little aha moments and things like that, those aha moments don't even happen. They're just like, oh, I got the problem right, move on,
Mhm.
right? And that takes a lot of the joy out of teaching, which was really the only benefit of teaching is those joyful moments where
The
you
aha moments.
aha moments.
Getting
Teachers
to
talk
witness that.
about this
Yeah.
moment of connection with the student where you've really gotten through to them. Like that disappears when they're in a fully digital environment, right? And monitoring data just isn't that exciting. And monitoring the data still doesn't tell you what the students are struggling with. Now, I will say there are some programs I think that do a better job of this than others.
Mhm.
I've really been pleased with programs like Desmos, which is now Amplify, and how they show teachers the actual data of interaction and what the students are saying and doing on the back end in meaningful ways that you can then pause all the students at once and interact with them, right? I think programs like that are really great.
Mhm.
Um, where I get a little sad is the programs that they randomize the problems for all the students. The issue with that is that when all the students are doing different problems, there's no way to have common conversations because you can't pull up a common problem the students are working on and say, let's talk about this one because none of the students had the problem you pull up, right?
Right.
And so I do think that we lose some commonality and some ability to discuss concepts and even to hold attention. I think one of the other issues that the article pointed out was, and I think the article that we talked about in the newsletter was based on a book called The Digital Delusion. And one of the issues, I think we'll all recognize this one. There's a difference between reading a physical book and reading on Kindle. Like I love reading fiction on Kindle because I'm not going to remember it anyways. It's just a
Mhm.
story I'm currently immersed in. But I have a
Mhm.
really hard time reading nonfiction on Kindle because I won't remember any of it if I read
I'm
it
so the same.
on Kindle, right? And the reason is that on a digital screen, everything is the same. And
Mhm.
so you have no memory of where it was in the book, how far through you were reading it, where it fell on the page. There's, it's just sameness over
Mhm.
and over and over.
Mhm.
And the best way I can explain it is it's like being in a prison cell where there's like no nuance to the room, right?
Right.
When you
You have
read,
you have one window to look out, and that's the only
and
thing
that's
you
the
can look
only
at.
thing you have, right? And
Yeah.
so learning math on a digital device means that you have no memory of no emotion attached to
Right.
the math. You have no physical memory of the moment of turning the page in the book, of where the problem fell on the page. Like it's just gone.
That's right.
And without those memories, the learning just doesn't actually stick very well. We
That's right.
need to have some emotion attached to learning to have it really stick well. And this is why some of the movements, like in math, around like things like building thinking classrooms, where the whole goal is to get students standing up at whiteboards, doing work with partners, because that experience sticks. When you work with a partner and you struggle with the problem and you talk about it, that's creating a memory of the learning, right? And just interacting on a screen and clicking next and multiple guessing it. It's not creating those types of memories. Um, and if anything, all it's creating is a frustration memory of like a frustration with a program, not a frustration even with the math, just a frustration with a program. And I think that's really harming learning. Humans weren't built to learn this way. I think that the hard part is that I think there are some things that could work really well with learning with technology and with personalization of learning. But these things get lost in the implementation of programs. It's very, we work at an ed tech company. It's very difficult with so little money at schools and so little money that can be spent at ed tech. It's very difficult to build the right thing because there's so little money to do it. And and I think that a lot of companies kind of lose their way uh, in what they in an effort to build out everything and be everything to everyone. They lose their way in like doing the things that are right. I see some positive signs, like that of things that probably are great for student learning. I read an example this morning of like an AI company where the goal is for the students to teach an AI bot how to do something.
I love
Because if
that.
they teach an AI bot, like we know that teaching something is a great way to learn it, right?
Mhm.
And so having everybody interact with the same kind of stupid bot that like doesn't know what to do next
Mhm.
is a good way to kind of like force that interaction to happen in a way that would be hard to replicate. Um, but in general, I don't think that kids are all that into learning from AI bots. It's a very difficult
Right.
sell for
Well,
students.
to your point, this idea of how humans were, built to learn, how our brains retain memory, how we connect ideas, the kind of frameworks and learning models we create in our brain, it requires sensory input, it requires physical input. And so this idea of sitting still in front of a screen and just clicking a button over and over, it is like the antithesis of what's going to actually build more nodes to learning. I completely agree with you on that. And it's something that there's so much research on, but yet we keep pushing down this road of like, yeah, it's this, we can do so much more on computers. And as you stated, companies want to be the all and everything, but they're misdirected. And a lot of companies are unfortunately not founded by teachers that have the classroom experience, who know what's really going on in a classroom, who understand the real problems that teachers are facing. What would classroom technology look like if it was adapted to teachers instead of asking teachers to adapt to it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the reasons we've built Socrate the way we have is that a teacher doesn't have to alter what they do in class to use Socrate. So, you just teach the way you normally teach, and we grab the data out of your voice for you and give it back to you. And I think our future in education is going to be more and more in person, like more and more driven by like the in-person learning experience and what the teacher can observe in learning in person. We're, certainly already starting to compete a lot with, students doing work at home with AI, and we don't know what work is the student, what work is the AI. And so what we observe in the classroom is going to have to be like the primary observation of learning, and
Mm.
keeping a record of all that is going to be difficult for teachers. And it will certainly be easier if they can just do it out loud as they walk around a room and interact with students and observe what they're doing. Um, and, if they can just say that data out loud and we track it for them, that'll be great, right? So I think we want to work alongside of a teacher and give them the tools they need to be that conductor of the classroom experience and that primary relationship with students to motivate them and keep them on track with learning. I think this is now going to be the new hardest thing in education is motivating a student to learn. It's always been difficult, but now it's especially difficult because the easy button is just too easy now. People say like, well, students have always cheated. Students have always tried to get around things. Yes, some students have always cheated, but the easy button is now so easy. You know, it used to be you had to find somebody who would help you to cheat or write your paper for you. There was a negotiation to take place around how that was going to work, right?
Mhm.
Like the barrier to entry for this is now super low. And, students, rightly so, are saying, like, look, if I was on the job, I could press this button, have it do the work for me. So why not have it do the work for me now? But the point of education is not to learn how to press one button that does all your work for you. The point of education is to develop your mind, to develop your own critical thinking skills and problem solving skills and your own internal compass for whether something is correct or not. And, without any knowledge of your own, how do you have an internal compass? How do you judge whether an AI response might be correct or not if
Right.
you have no internal compass to rely on? Um, and I think this is going to be the real challenge now in education is figuring out how to help students to help themselves to have that, to
Yeah.
learn that.
You keep saying the word challenge, and that's actually something sort of ringing in my brain is that we have actually removed some of the learning challenges that students typically face in a paper pencil mode, with the teacher in front of them, watching for those aha moments, having collective conversations, like all of these art of teaching things that teachers used to be able to conduct in a classroom where you got to watch the productive struggle, where you got to watch students, not figure something out and then walk through the steps again and then well, let's do it together. And now you show me how you do it. We've taken that away. And so this AI as easy button is even more challenging because we've also just taken away the things that help students learn.
Yeah.
Do you see a way that we can actually help teachers counter some of this? What can we do to help teachers facing this right now?
I mean, I think the reality of it is that many of us have arrived at the same conclusion, which is that we start class without devices, right? Like we have iPad shelves and Chromebook, cubbies and things. Like I found it easier to start class with no devices
Hmm.
and just get out the devices if there's something we're doing today that involves the devices. I teach seventh and eighth periods, which makes it particularly likely that the students have no charge left on their iPads. I try to start activities by having students think for themselves first. Let's not get our devices yet. Let's see what we remember from what we just learned first. Let's talk it over with our friends and see if we can come up with the answers.
Hmm.
Like because those all create emotional moments that make it more likely that the learning sticks.
Yeah.
Right? And so after a period of time when they think for themselves first, we might move to using a device. But I have to say that at the moment we go get a device, we've just lost 10 minutes of class time while they all slowly navigate to where they're supposed to be, right? And by the
Hmm.
time that period of navigation is over, it's usually like 10 minutes. So I guess one of the other things I've been doing is like challenging them to do it quicker. Like, let's see who can be there first. Let's see if we can have everybody there in 1 minute, right? Like things like that. Make it a contest, so that they stay on track for that minute to get to where they're supposed to be. The amount of wandering reminds me of one of those old Family Circus cartoons, like where you see the child wander through the neighborhood and the random path they take. I wish I could document that on an iPad, like the random path it takes to get a student to where they're supposed to be for the lesson they're supposed to be on, right? Well,
Yeah.
first I gotta go check the Google Slides to see if anybody
Right.
added thing. And then I got to go play a game for 2 minutes. And then I've got to go check what my grade is in this other class. And then like, no, you don't. You could just go right to what we're supposed to be doing. And
That
so
quiz is
like
hard.
turning that into a game of some kind, like a, can we all get there in under 1 minute? Like help your neighbor if they're having trouble,
I love that.
things like that, turning what should be an easy ask into a game, essentially,
I love
uh,
that.
is something we can do.
Making it fun,
Yeah.
in a real life way. Well, Maria, I want to thank you for all your insights and sharing today. It's always fun to nerd out with you. Everyone who is watching this, you can tune in on January 23rd. We're going to be doing another Teaching Out Loud. That one is going to be about the Soundbites article, When Behavior Escalates, Data Calms. We'll be talking about the calming nature of having data on actual behavior management and how that can help teachers in the classroom. Any final words, Maria?
Good luck out there.
Good luck out there. Happy teaching. Thank you so much
Happy
for
teaching.
joining us.